Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Tuesday, May 17th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Notre Dame game is in 110 days, the game against Michigan in 194 days. One quick piece of news to start today's show. Former Ohio State defensive lineman Noah Potter announced Monday that he was transferring to Cincinnati to play for Luke Fickell and the Bearcats. So as of Monday evening, only Marcus Hooker is still in the portal looking for a new home among former Buckeyes who left the program earlier this year. We're going to take one day off from the recruiting beat on today's show to talk about the current Buckeyes instead of the guys for next season and beyond. So today we're going to be wrapping up our post-spring look at the two deep with the defensive backs. My guest today is Tony Gerdeman. He and I have the pleasure of doing the Buckeye Weekly podcast together. Tony, thanks as always for being here.
Tom, the pleasure is mine. The honor is mine. Thank you for the invite. I was surprised to receive it.
Was that a power pause there? Was that what you just did to me there? You kind of kept me hanging. I was like, did my mic go out? What happened? Yes, you have once again demonstrated your power with by simply not speaking. Incredible. Truly a work of art. Let's start with the cornerbacks, and I'm going to have to ask you to speak here. The cornerbacks are a spot where it feels like there is a very clear-cut top two, and then a very clear-cut next two, and then after that, it's like, I guess there's two more guys behind there, but more questions than anything else.
Yeah, I think the delineation is pretty clear with Cameron Brown and Denzel Burke as your top two. Then second-year guys, J.K. Johnson and Jordan Hancock. They've been pushing. They've been rising up the ranks. Can only go so high, though. And then behind them, the two true freshmen, Ryan Turner and Jair Brown, who both were in for this spring and played as well as you could hope a couple of freshmen to play. But, yeah, it's very, I think, cut and dry, pretty simple there. The bigger question, I think, right now is, as we've talked about, can Jordan Hancock and Ja'Kalen Johnson get into that mix and see the field and make an impact in the fall? I think they will play. Will it be along the lines of, remember when Cameron Brown and Seven Banks were, second-year players, and they were getting some run here and there, but they weren't necessarily in the rotation? Is this one of those situations where they find time for them? Because we also don't really know how much Tim Walton, Perry Eliano, Jim Knowles are believers in any type of rotation. We know everybody says, well, if they show that they can play, then we need to play them. But let's see if the sophomores, Jordan Hancock and redshirt freshman Ja'Kalen Johnson, can make that happen and force their situation to be decided upon.
And, there have been health issues. Cameron Brown has had health issues at times in the past. If he's not on the field, then it sort of takes the issue out of J.K. Johnson and Jordan Hancock's hands, and someone has to play. So it does feel like coming out of the spring, they were I think gun to their heads, I think they'd say they were at least somewhat confident or somewhat comfortable with those younger guys. That's obviously going to continue to be a learning process. But I think, the consensus coming out of spring was that they were pretty, much further ahead than they were this time last year, which makes sense. So yeah, we'll see how that all shakes out. If they could get 3 to 4 of those guys to the point where they were really comfortable with them this fall, that would go a long way towards, having an insurance policy in case of injury, giving you some more options in terms of defending the pass and all of that. So they have plenty of options at the safety spots. Those 3 safety spots have really been a big topic this offseason. Let's start with the nickel safety. That is something we've talked about as a slot corner a bunch in the past. I mean, they have sort of new terminology for all this stuff with Jim Knowles coming in. They call it the nickel safety. Can you explain what that position does, and then who is likely going to be getting the snaps there? The first and second guys maybe getting the snaps there at nickel safety.
Yeah, the nickel is just a 5th defensive back, replaces the Sam linebacker, and generally defenses do this in on passing downs. Ohio State's defense will be doing this on their base defense. They're not alone. It's pretty common. You play 5 defensive backs. The nickel handles the slot. They need to be able to defend the slot receiver in coverage, and it's very much a coverage position. And then you help out against the run when you can, and you don't necessarily need to take on any type of tackles or anything like that. You just get in the way the best you can to keep contained. But it's mainly a position, as Jim Knowles said this spring, you have to be able to cover. And so it can't necessarily be a bigger safety or a slower safety. And it's Tanner McAlister, the transfer from Oklahoma State, who has done it for, I think, his entire career at this point in Jim Knowles' defense. He's a graduate. This is his 5th year. Knowles expected him, thought he was going to go to the NFL, but landed in the portal and ended up a Buckeye, and I think a pretty sizable signing for Ohio State to be able to bring in a guy who is very experienced in this defense, very experienced in this position. And then behind him, you've got Cameron Martinez, redshirt sophomore, who has played there, gosh, he may have played every safety position last year for the Buckeyes as they were trying to find answers and look for solutions. So he's there behind Tanner McAlister. So two very good athletes. It will be interesting to see how well Tanner McAlister does in the Big Ten. It's a little bit different than the Big 12. But I know Jim Knowles is very happy to have him here leading the defense and just in a way where he can help. He's been able to help everybody. He's been able to help his room. He's been able to help people he's on the field with because he knows the defense. He knows the coach. And so he was able to be an intermediary while they needed it. I don't think they need it anymore. I think that the guys know the defense and they know the coach, so they can go straight to Knowles if they need, or they know that if he's chewing them out, it's not the worst thing in the world. And so that nickel spot is going to be out there a lot. And as Jim Knowles has said, like Tanner McAlister is used to being out there against 12 personnel running teams as well. So he's not going to be this guy that maybe you only see a little bit against Wisconsin or Iowa. He may be out there more than we expect.
And, they have not taken that many transfers over the last few years. I mean, the transfer portal has obviously become a very big thing in college football. If you think back, they've had a lot of guys leave for the portal. They have not brought in very many, but the ones they have brought in, the hit rate is pretty high. That does not mean he is going to be the Justin Fields of defensive backs or even the Jonah Jackson of defensive backs. But they have had a pretty good way, a pretty good sense for targeting guys who are going to be able to contribute. You would figure that would certainly be the case here with Jim Knowles, with someone he's worked with a number of years in the past. And it sounds like Tanner McAlister is well on his way to contributing this fall in a pretty significant way at that nickel spot for Ohio State. The boundary safety, that Jim Knowles calls that the bandit position, that's more of like a traditional strong safety kind of role. So what are they looking for out of guys there? You mentioned that the nickel is more of a pass defense kind of role. What are they looking for out of that bandit position? And then who's potentially in line to start or back up there?
Yeah, the boundary safety, he covers the shorter side of the field, so he still needs to be able to cover, but he's going to be involved in the running game a bit more as well. And right now, you're talking about Josh Proctor and Court Williams, and Josh Proctor started the spring a little banged up and still recovering from his injury from last year, but by the end of the spring, he looked like he was essentially full go. He's played in the spring game, but wasn't doing any of the any tackling or anything like that. And so he seemed to grab the job, I think, I don't want to say definitively, but almost definitively once he was able to get out there and show Jim Knowles what he could do. Because for the longest time during spring, Jim Knowles just kept saying, I haven't been able to see him. I don't know what he can do. I've seen a little bit on tape. We have high expectations. We know he's a great athlete. But then the more that he got to see him this spring, he really seemed to gravitate towards Josh Proctor. And we also know he had great things to say about Court Williams, but also mentioned that they need to continue to work on Court Williams' pass defense. But also Court Williams was, again, banged up this spring. And that's been one of the stories of his entire career. So he wasn't able to compete for the job fully. And there are still concerns about his ability to cover. So there's going to be some situations where I do think it's Josh Proctor who will be the starter at that bandit safety, and Court Williams will be one of the backups. But do they find some other roles or packages for him? And that'll be up to him to show that he deserves it and that he can stay healthy. And, it's unfortunate because we've heard so many great things about Court Williams. And he got to see him play pretty well in the Rose Bowl, but just haven't been able to see him stay healthy and find a role in this defense.
All right, so that's 2/3 of the safety spots. Last up is the adjuster position, and you can kind of think of that as like the free safety in a traditional defense. There are a bunch of really interesting names in the conversation there, and one thing people may notice is, hey, the guy who was a leading tackler on last year's team, didn't he kind of play that boundary safety position? So whatever happened to Ronnie Hickman, Tony?
Yeah, that's exactly the question. Ronnie Hickman now is at that free safety, and it was interesting because a year ago he started out as the bullet, and you put the bullet at that position. You put somebody at the bullet because they can't necessarily do that single high safety. They can't really cover the ground that you would want from that. Now, in this defense, as the free safety, he won't necessarily have to cover the entire field. He's the wide side, he's the field side safety, but he's still going to have to be able to run and cover and just make sure nothing gets past him. But Jim Knowles has been very high on him from the outset. He knows the defense. He's able to direct traffic in front of him. He can tell guys where to be, and so he's picked up the mental aspect of it that I think it's key. And when you do that immediately for a coach, they are going to be able to they'll continue to find good things about you and ways to use you because they can rely on you, and you kind of take some of that fear away from a coach in terms of putting somebody out there. So it is interesting though that he was the strong safety, the bullet last year. Now he's going to be covering more ground and will be doing his flying around in a different manner. Behind him though, Tom, is we still haven't seen Lathan Ransom. Is he a strong safety? Is he a free safety? I think that's a huge question. Kai Stokes, the true freshman, had a really good spring game. He was everywhere. Of course, he played most of the game on both, for both teams, so he should be making a lot of plays, but really impressive. And Jim Knowles even said after the spring game that the way Kai Stokes played in that game and throughout spring gives him confidence that it does add to the depth. But I think there are concerns about what is behind Ronnie Hickman, and I know people have talked about, can Court Williams do that? It sure doesn't sound like Court Williams is a possibility or a probability in that role. He's more of a strong safety kind of guy. Sonny Styles will be here in June, probably another strong safety kind of guy, and I know some people will bristle at that, but there's still some stuff to shake out, and kind of like the offensive line. Like, how many left tackles do they actually have instead of all of these right tackles and guards? How many free safeties does Ohio State have, and do they just have strong safeties? And Jansen Dunn is another guy who really highly thought of from the coaches as a free safety prospect, was injured last year, injured in the spring, and really haven't been able to see him come into what he needs into that role and maybe compete for some playing time. So there are a number of guys, but if your number two is Kai Stokes, it's not the end of the world because Josh Proctor was a former freshman backup free safety. Jordan Fuller had that role. So there's a history of it where it says both something about the player and also says something about your lack of depth.
Yeah, and that depth was the next thing I was going to ask you about, because, it feels like corner and safety are spots where depth is going to be a concern in, at least something of a concern in at least a year or two. And, they have lost a bunch of guys to the portal: Bryson Shaw, Legend Cavazos, Ryan Watts, Andre Turrentine, Marcus Hooker. I think that's all of them that since the end of last season. But, that's a spot that I talked to Alex Gleitman about on yesterday's show. They are likely going to end up with a big recruiting class for 2023. I think the bigger question is depth a concern to you this fall, or is that more of a down the road problem?
I think it's a concern when you consider everybody in the top two nearly, or in the two deep, has injury history. Cam Brown and at corner, Denzel Burke finished the season with a bum shoulder. So there are some concerns there. Ja'Kalen Johnson missed most of the season with an injury. He's maybe your number 4 corner. You look at the safeties, Josh Proctor missed last season. Court Williams has been injured most of his career. Ronnie Hickman has been healthy, except for, he missed the first season when he was a true freshman because of, I believe, an ankle or a knee injury that he came in with. Lathan Ransom is out for the season. So, yeah, there's a lot of concern there. Now, if they all stay healthy, I think that it's a pretty decent 2 deep, and you can win with it, especially with this scheme. But you start losing guys, and then you're going to be relying on some freshmen, some redshirt freshmen, guys who are really unproven, and then it can get scary. But also, that's sometimes when players emerge and they step up, and you're like, gosh, imagine where we would have been if this guy hadn't stepped up, or if we had to go with the original starter.
Yes, we call that 2021 the Denzel Burke story. That's just one example, and you may have an opportunity to see more guys kind of take on that role, or assume a bigger role than expected this fall. It's that'll be interesting to see how those different positions shake out. And of course, you have the questions of, we haven't seen all of these different safety positions, and we haven't seen the Jim Knowles defense yet in a real game for Ohio State. So there will be some stuff left to shake out during summer workouts and fall camp, and then in the lead up to that Notre Dame game, which is, once again, just 110 days away, almost here. Tony, thank you for getting us through one more day of the off season, and we will. You can find Tony and I talking about football also on. If you enjoyed that show, you can find us on the Buckeye Weekly podcast. You can find that along with all of our other great shows by searching Buckeye Scoop wherever you're listening to this. And Mark Givler and Bill the Bank Green do Gives in the Bank. Kevin Noon does the Big Me Kickoff. Alex Kleitman does Around the Oval. He just had a great interview with offensive lineman Chase Basantis, who is from his neck of the woods out east and one of Ohio State's remaining top targets on the offensive line. So that's worth a listen. Make sure you check that out, as well as all of our other shows. You can subscribe right there, which will let you make sure you never miss an episode, and also leave us a 5-star rating or review on each and every one of those shows, which will help other folks find them in the future. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.